Hello, this is ArtGainz, and this is ArtGainz Live number 4, your ultimate resource for Christian nationalist infotainment and commentary. I really should have a script right now to read about about where you can find my other content, like my novel and stuff like that. But I'll eventually figure that sort of thing out. I have a number of items today, including some information about the assassination attempt on former President Donald Trump, a video about a woman who was absolutely flabbergasted to discover that there are MAGA trauma surgeons, and an article on forced child vaccinations, and then I was going to read a little bit from a book on St. Louis, because I thought, you can pretty much go anywhere for news about what's going on in the present. You're not going to find a lot of people talking about what's the news of the past or history, and I thought it might be a good idea to go look into history a little bit, since they say that those who know nothing about history are doomed to repeat it. And St. Louis seems like a relevant sort of person to look at these days, I think. So I was thinking I might just wait a while before getting into the main topic, the one that is reflected in the thumbnail. So I'm going to start with the video about the woman who is shocked to learn that doctors support Donald Trump. So this is a clip from, I think it's, from Sky News. This is a host of Sky News, but it quickly transitions to the woman in question.
I was watching interviews from what happened in Pennsylvania a couple days ago, and I saw an interview with an ER doctor who was trying to render aid to the man who was unalived during the rally. And I could not get over this fact, that there was an ER doctor wearing a MAGA hat and a Trump shirt. This is a guy working in any ER across the country that we would need to trust our daughters and granddaughters to if they were harmed. Someone who would need to give aid to someone who is gay, an immigrant, someone who is trans. And I was mortified thinking about that. Horrified. This guy's not just, your run-of-the-mill Republican. He's a rabid Trump supporter. MAGA hat. It's really scary.
You're the scary.
Yeah, so that sort of speaks for itself. The left-wing media has been engaging in such dehumanizing rhetoric that this woman from this I believe it's a TikTok video, is absolutely shocked to discover that a regular sort of person, in fact possibly a upper class, probably a very wealthy, very successful sort of person, might support Donald Trump, whereas I presume that this lady is accustomed to presuming that all Trump supporters must be like inbred hillbillies or something like that. Yeah, it speaks for itself, I guess. All right, let's see here. Let me switch that off. Video capture device, turn that off, and bring this up. Okay, so here's a news article. I can't read what is this from? It's too small for me to read. A news article about what's going on in Brampton, which is near Toronto. Numerous piles of human feces appear in the area around the Hindu god statue in Brampton. I think this article isn't particularly new, but this is just continuing from something I was talking about yesterday. All of the Indian immigrants are bringing some of their Indian behaviors over here to Canada, and there's too many of them that there's so many of them that they don't feel any sort of social stigma to modify their behavior to fit in. One thought I had about this was, oh yes, yesterday I mentioned I also saw a video about some older Indian immigrant who came to Canada several decades ago, saying that it was only like 5% of these immigrants from his home country who engage in this sort of behavior, public defecation, and he was utterly ashamed of them. But the deal is that, you know, like, I don't know how that individual would behave if he was in India, but the significant thing is that even when he lived in India, the sophisticated people tolerate that sort of behavior. Okay, so like this guy who made this video complaining about his fellow immigrants who aren't behaving properly, if he were in his own country, he would tolerate that sort of behavior, right? And if you'll find plenty of videos on the internet of Indians sort of actually reveling in their lack of hygiene. You can find them on Gab. Probably have a more difficult time finding them on YouTube, but yeah, it's quite shocking to see people actually reveling in their unhygienic practices, which I won't describe because they're pretty disgusting for by European standards. Very and I'm sure it contributes to a lot of sickness as well. The Ganges River, which plays a large role in the Hindu religion, they a lot of religious observances, I believe, I hear occur in the Ganges River. They have to bathe in the river and that sort of thing. It's the most contaminated river in the world or something. And like people go to the bathroom in the river, and then downstream there's people doing their religious ablations or whatever the word is in the river. So yeah, it's the moral of the story is that if you bring lots of people in from a country where they tolerate that sort of thing, you're going to get that sort of behavior. And it doesn't really, it's of no significance if like the older immigrants object, because the fact of the matter is, the more of them you have, they're going to be more prone to tolerating that kind of thing.
You're not doomed yet, but in all of world history, there has never been a civilization that has so opened its doors to another civilization that is openly hostile to it. So this is unprecedented, what's happening. Your ancestors of Europe, and I describe it in my books because I write about history, fought tooth and nail to prevent Islam from entering and conquering Europe, because that was one of the grand plans that went on for century after century. From the east, the Turks were trying to enter the Constantinople. They surrounded Vienna in 1683, and before that, the Muslims, I told you, went up into Tours in France in 732, 1,000 years later. This was an actual goal. And now Western Europe is saying, oh, none of that matters. It was a misunderstanding. Come on in. But they haven't changed. That mentality, and when I say they, that's obviously, I'm simplifying. The mentality that I've described is part of Islam. It's an Islamic concept. So the Islamic State, you're told, oh yeah, they have nothing to do with Islam. They've twisted it. No, they haven't. They are a representation of what Islam, the caliphs, the sultanates, the emirates, that's how they operated. The heads of Islam, the grand imams and the muftis said the same exact thing. Okay, so that is what it is. again, it's not my point to arguing, oh, well, this particular migrant wants to conquer you. Maybe he doesn't. Maybe he's looking for a good life. I understand that, and that's what makes it complicated. But to just open your borders completely to that demographic, which has within it, not all of it, but within it, that kernel of animosity for Christians and so-called infidels, and the imperative to conquer the world in the name of jihad for Allah, which they're the good guys, keep in mind. They never see themselves as the bad guys. This is one of the issues with all conflicts. They're not bad guys. They're good guys in their minds. You're the bad guys because you're infidels, and they're trying to bring the light of Islam to you. So that's another aspect of how moral, or the morality that they feel. They're the good guys, okay, in doing this. Because look at you, Denmark and Europe, you're all dissipated drunks and, profligates, and there's no real. I'm sharing with you their arguments because I read it and I hear it. So they're bringing to you goodness, okay? But before, your ancestors, because I guess they had their own social order and their own goodness, and it was called Christianity, were able to fight it. But I guess in this current void of sort of this atheistic climate, anything goes, and who's to say they're wrong? Maybe they're right, etc., etc. And now you have what's happening. So it's a very unprecedented experience. A lot of people talk about the Roman Empire, this sort of thing happened, but it didn't, and we can get into that. It was actually, they were still cognizant of trying to maintain their own social, cultural mores, Rome. And it fell to the Goths and the Germanic peoples. And I'm just saying, some people use this analogy, but in this case, this is completely your doing. Not you, but it's Europe's doing. Okay, you're bringing a hostile force that's openly hostile, and lo and behold, when I look where Muslims are, I see chaos and violence and criminality and rape and grooming in England. Okay, that's what always happened under Islam. Okay, so is there a hope? I think so. I hope so in time, but it's so bad that it even had to get to this point. It's such an abnegation and betrayal of your own heritage, of these men and women who fought and died to preserve your way of life against an open, hostile force, and now they're being welcomed in, and why not? It's okay. So I guess so. It's a matter of time.
So where's the hope? Excuse me. So where's the hope? You say there is
the hope is to wake up, wake up and see what reality and what I'm talking about, and understand the history and the doctrine of Islam and what Islam is all about. Islam is unequivocally hostile.
All right, I set that up so that I couldn't actually hear that. I had to read along. But I watched it earlier, and I have to admit that the one thought I had while I was tempted to have while watching that was, I mean, Islam is not compatible with Western civilization, but the Jews are actually less compatible, to put it bluntly. Not to discredit whatever this guy is saying. It's that guy. He looks like a crusader. He looks like someone who should be taken seriously. And I can't remember his name. I'll see if I can put a link to that video in the description. But he's written a book on the Muslim history of trying to take over Europe. And yeah. Now, there was one thing he said there. What was it? About I can't remember. I'll have to possibly come back to that if I remember what I was going to say about it. But let's go back to here. Okay, I guess I'll start on the... Oh, yes. This was the main thing I wanted to talk about here. when the footage of the attempted assassination of Donald Trump came out, there was this image that was captured, which appears to show the bullet flying past Donald Trump's ear. And I've been meaning to cover this since I started this podcast. I just kept forgetting to bring it up. But when I saw this, I thought, that this image should not be possible. If this is a video taken with if this is a still from a video taken by a regular camera, there's no way it should have picked up a bullet, because even if it was filming at, I don't know, 60 frames per second, normally that wouldn't be you wouldn't pick up a bullet, because even in the span of 1/60th of a second, the bullet would be traveling way too fast for it to appear. So I thought, well, okay, maybe this isn't a bullet. Maybe it's something that got chipped off of the teleprompter or something, and that's what's flying past his head. But actually, no, apparently not. This is actually a picture of the bullet, and it's because although the camera might have been filming at a regular frame rate, what I've heard is that the shutter speed was actually set to extremely fast. Okay. So the length of time that the shutter on the camera was open was short enough that it would be able to pick up a speeding bullet. And that's very strange. You normally you wouldn't film that way. There's no reason to do it unless you were specifically doing it for some reason. And it seems possible that this camera was set to this incredibly high shutter speed because someone knew what was going to happen, and they were trying to catch the assassination in very high definition, gory detail. So, in other words, this image could have been very different. It could have been absolutely horrifying. If the bullet had been just a little bit, like an inch to the right. All right, so moving on to an article from the Dark Herald. See if I can get this working. Turn this on. There we go. Okay, yeah, so like I said, this is an article from the Dark Herald. The title is The Echo Male. Now, if you know anything about the SSH, or the socio-sexual hierarchy, you know that there are several different ranks on the socio-sexual hierarchy, and the main ones are Alpha, Bravo, Delta, Gamma, Omega, Sigma, and Lambda. And I guess if you're not familiar with those terms, those don't mean anything. But there's a long history of people making up new rankings for themselves. But I'm not going to go into explaining what all those rankings are. I'm sure most of the people who are watching this are familiar with them. If you want to learn more, I think you can go to the Sigma Game Substack. You'll probably learn about them there. It's a very useful tool for team building. That's what it was originally created for. But anyway, the Dark Herald here is proposing a subcategory of Delta called the Echo Male, and I thought this article was possibly more relevant than a lot of the other attempts to create new categories for the socio-sexual hierarchy. Echo Male, subset of Delta Male, age range 29 to 15, first emerged in approximately 2014, frequently self-identifies as Sigma Male, like James Bond or something, defined in their own words as being outside the socio-sexual hierarchy. This is because they are. When the male sociosexual hierarchy was first postulated by Vox Day, there was a sad but predictable phenomenon. Gamma males who found out about it would immediately declare themselves a sigma male. Now there's a nasty but accurate joke that goes, there are 3 genders: high-value men, low-value men, and women. After all, these guys didn't think of themselves as being in competition with dumb jock, sports ball alpha males. They just sneered at them behind their backs. Therefore, they were sigmas. Sigma was just a new way of being a secret king. The echo male who is claiming to be a sigma is a different animal altogether. And they are one of the largest groups of men today, sadly. Did I say echo male? I hope I said echo male. The echo male who is claiming to be a sigma is a different animal altogether, and they are one of the largest groups of men today. Sadly, their numbers are growing. We missed something. In those early days of the SSH, some of these sigmas were actually deltas who were incapable of attracting a girl in the current sexual market. In 2024, 50% of all relationships began online. If you hadn't been single in the last 10 years, your knowledge of dating is obsolete. If you haven't been single in the last 10 years, your knowledge of dating is obsolete. Zoomers who are trying to get in touch with a willing partner are on Tinder, Hinge, and Bumble. The echo male is a product of this environment. Women are incredibly complicated when it comes to what they want in a man. Unless you strip away everything from a man but his looks, and that's exactly what the dating apps do. What's left then is super hypergamy, and that's what women must act on. The prime motivator for the genetic code of any organism, from microbe to man, is reproduction of itself. The male solution is to spray and pray, copulate with as many different women as possible. It's a strategy of affordable mass. As we all know, very few men get to do that because women have a very different problem. In a state of nature, women can reproduce perhaps 10 times, but of those 10, only 1 to 4 will live to reach adulthood. If her genetic code is to propagate, she needs to acquire the best genes she can. It is her most fundamental drive, and it is also the most complex. Health, strength, status play a myriad of tailored specific needs of individual women. Wait a minute. Health, strength, status, plus a myriad of tailored specific needs of individual women are in play. In Why Women Have Sex by Meston and Buss, 237 triggers for sex were cataloged for women. Most of these are determined by her social environment. But what if she isn't in a social environment? Then the only attraction trigger she has left is looks. Suddenly a man's appearance matters more than anything else. This is the really bad part for the echo male, because of this limiter, girls scale upward quite drastically on a man's looks. On this online dating app hellscape, a male 5 becomes a 0, a male 6 is also a 0, a male 7 is barely there as a 5, however, an 8 jumps to a 7.5. He's in the mix even if it's mostly women rating 4 to 6. A male 9 lands at 8.5. And if you're in the top 4% of males, if you are 10 in appearance, the earth lies at your feet. At this point, girls are actively and aggressively pursuing you. Let me read that again. If you are in the top 4% of males, if you are 10 in appearance, the earth lies at your feet. At this point, girls are actively and aggressively pursuing you. But what about the Zoomer boy who is a 6 or below? His life is now a very lonely prospect. The spinal reflex of the red pill verse is learn game. Frankly, we're talking about a genetic set already saddled with adverse selection. On top of that, they've spent too much of their life online to develop the necessary social skills. And they've been taught since grade school that masculinity is bad. They are invested in the construct of game being tied inextricably with misogyny, and if we are being honest, they aren't completely wrong these days. It didn't used to be that way, but it is now. The rest of the 6s and below have to try their luck on the dating apps. After being left swiped, literally thousands of times over the course of a few years, they just give up. Naturally, they are reviled for this, particularly by boomer men. This is BS. The Echo male wanted to be a regular guy. He tried to be a Delta. He did what he was taught to do. He did everything he was supposed to and ended up being discarded for it. He tried to go to college and found out that 60% of the freshman slots were reserved for women. Since only 35% of college graduates are men now, he probably doesn't have that going for him. If he did matriculate, he is now trying to find a job in a world where quotas are dead against him. When it was decided that most of the chairs at the table had to fill a checkbox, they didn't bring in more chairs for the rest. He is just shit out of luck. I hope you enjoy your life driving for Uber. When he sends out his cries of the heart online, the only thing he gets told at that point is, "The world don't owe you nothing. Get more education." Because boomers have literally no idea what else to say, and no woman on earth cares about how hard men struggle. As the saying goes, they just wait at the finish line and sleep with the winner. No girlfriend, no career path, and worse. No girlfriend, no career path, and worse, a pile of debt if he went to college. The only thing most of the men in this situation can do is enter a hibernative state. It's become the default. They have free Adderall, legal pot, YouTube, Pirate Bay, and video games. That's all he's got for the next 60 years. This is the hollow man. This is the Echo male. The sad part is, it's never been easier to get into the top 15%. I wish he continued from there, but he doesn't. Maybe he does elsewhere. Then there's some notes. No, there is no female social sexual hierarchy. On a scale of 1 to 10, a woman who rates 3 and wants to be promiscuous can be promiscuous. She will always be able to find some guy who will jump on the grenade. A man who rates a 3 and wants to be promiscuous cannot be promiscuous. That's all there is to it, and that's why there is no socio-sexual hierarchy for women. It doesn't matter what she looks like, she can always get laid. This is a disaster for the women who indulge themselves. I'll go into why in another post. Frankly, from what I've seen, most of the guys that do go the game route mostly learn just enough to pick up the one girl at the bar that was DTF that night anyway. What is DTF? I know what that means. Down to sleep with someone. You bagged the one that was going to go home with someone tonight, and you were someone. You are now the 507th notch on her bedpost. Congrats on that, Casanova. You aren't going to find the mother of your children at the club. If you do, God help you. Yeah. So anyway, I've been listening to a bunch of I guess you call it manosphere stuff on the internet last few days, and I've been thinking about. I think I played a video from the Better Bachelor the other day, but a lot of those guys are not they're not Christian, and they don't like being referred to as black pills, but they are kind of black pilled, and I believe the Dark Herald is a Christian. I don't actually I'm not that familiar with who he is, but anyway, this presentation is probably a bit more edifying than a lot of what you'll get on the internet. I think so anyway. But yeah, even this is getting to be kind of black pilled. There's a lot more than what the Dark Herald is talking about here, because obviously if you have like non-Christian girls, they would tend not to have much of a inhibition against sleeping around, so that's horrible. But but even in the church, you're still going to find girls who, not they probably like they might not have slept around, but they're still empowered, and so they're never going to feel any kind of romantic attraction for a regular sort of guy. There's even they are still going to only be attracted to the alpha chads and that sort of thing. So it's might be slightly less of a problem in the church, but it's still a problem in the church. I think so anyway. I wrote an article a while ago about what the solution to this problem would be, and there's different ways of putting it, some of which are more tactful than others, but essentially what will have to happen at some point, and what will definitely happen at some point, is there will be a sort of reverse sexual revolution, and all the current thought leaders who are, tolerant toward female empowerment will be removed and replaced by probably some rather extreme people who are, for some reason, very popular. I'm sure they'll be very charismatic and looked up to, and they'll say things like they'll create a sort of social climate in which women are looked down at for competing with men for the same sort of jobs and going to university and that sort of thing. So the long-term solution will be that there'll be a return to the way, to some extent, to the way things used to be, and that will include stuff like men and women having to go to different schools, even on the elementary school level. You'll have different schools for boys and different schools for girls. They'll still probably be like colleges for women, but they'll be called women's colleges, and they'll teach things like homemaking and that sort of thing. And they might include things like accounting and some higher level stuff, but they'd be for like women who intend to marry businessmen and that sort of thing, so that they can help their husband to some extent. It'll probably also include things like I'm sure this will happen somewhere, probably not everywhere, but it will probably include things like they'll make it illegal for women to have their own private bank accounts. That was actually a thing in the United States, I think, until at some point in the 20th century. They might make laws about women not being able to get driver's licenses without the permission of her closest male relative, and that sort of thing. And this will, the purpose of this will be to make women capable of falling in love, because the modern social climate, women are not capable of falling in love, because they're kind of restricted by their natural brain chemistry and hormones to only fall in love with men who they perceive as being more powerful than they are. And since society has artificially empowered women, they're only attracted to the top 1% of guys, and so they won't be content with them. But unfortunately, there aren't enough of these kings around for all the women. But so that's a long-term solution, and I'm sure that will happen eventually. I'm not sure how soon. It would probably be associated with very traumatic civil war events and stuff like that. So there would probably be things like people writing new constitutions for their small new kingdoms and stuff like that. The short-term solution is I don't know, like, a lot of people would be very tempted to just be completely black-pilled by this sort of thing. But I mean, it is true what a lot of the manosphere people say, that what these echo males should focus on is improving themselves, exercising, and getting their finances in order and stuff like that. It can be difficult, and I know this from personal experience, to do that if you don't really see much of a prospect for yourself. But that's why it's also necessary to put your faith in Jesus Christ, read your Bible, and go to church. That's the only surefire way to avoid the utterly black oblivion of depression, which threatens the echo male. I think, anyway. Let me think. The other thing the other thought I had was that there might be ways to sort of hijack the way women think, the way girls think. That might be by like learning to fight, learning Brazilian jiu-jitsu and that sort of thing, and keeping in mind also that, as I understand it, women like being told. Women actually prefer and like being dominated, and they find that very, regardless of what the feminists would have you say, women actually very much enjoy being told what to do, and having a man make decisions for them. That seems to me to be pretty self-evident. I don't know about how to practically apply that, but I'm sure there's any number of ways it could be applied. All right, next item. This is an article from the People's Voice. I don't know which side of the aisle this news site bends, but the heading is Vermont Supreme Court rules schools can force vaccinate children without parental consent. By Baxter Dimitri. Okay, can't tell that much about this guy from his name, but let's continue. Schools have been given the green light to vaccinate children with the COVID-19 mRNA shots without parental consent by the Vermont Supreme Court, which ruled that schools are protected under the PrEP Act, which provides immunity from liability. I don't really have to continue reading after that. Like, what I would like to say in response to this is, something which you're not allowed to say. I would say that if I wrote a science fiction novel in which there was a government which was pumping chemicals into children, I would have the hero of this novel engage in some acts of extreme violence against that government and against whoever was engaging in that sort of thing. But of course, like I said, that's in a fictional novel which I might write, or you could say in Minecraft. All right, continuing on, the decision by the Vermont Supreme Court opens to the door. What? The decision by the Vermont Supreme Court opens to the door for educators to further encroach upon the rights and responsibilities of parents by vaccinating children against the wishes of their parents and facing no legal consequences. The court set the precedents during a case involving a child labeled LP in the original complaint, who was vaccinated in November 2021 at a clinic hosted by the Wyndham Southeast School District. LP was a student at the district's academy school at the time of the forced vaccination. LP's father told a school official days prior to the clinic the child was not to be vaccinated, court documents say. The school official acknowledged the father's directive according to Friday's ruling. The school child also reminded the staff that her father did not want her to be vaccinated. However, clinic workers forced LP to have one dose of the Pfizer mRNA vaccine. That's some, I can't really say what I want to say there. According to the school, the child was allegedly misidentified according to the court ruling. Academy school officials realized the mistake and called LP's parents to explain and apologize, which led to LP's parents removing the child from the school. Well, good for them. According to the Vermont Supreme Court ruling on Friday, state and school officials involved in vaccinating the child without parental consent cannot be sued. Well, being sued is the least of what the consequences should be in this situation, I think, or prosecuted because they are protected by the Public Readiness and Emergency Preparedness PrEP Act, which grants liability immunity. Fox 29 report, in the event of a public health emergency, the PrEP Act ensures certain covered persons are immune from claims causally related to the use of a covered countermeasure. A vaccine is considered a covered countermeasure. To avoid dismissal on immunity grounds, plaintiffs would have had to present well-pleaded allegations showing that 1. At least one defendant was not a covered person, 2. Some conduct by a defendant was not causally related to administering a covered countermeasure, 3. The substance injected into LP was not a covered blah, blah, blah. It's just a lot of legal speak. The High Court's ruling affirms a January 2023 decision by the state Supreme Court. Man, this is what happens when the government decides that it is can take the place of God, I suppose. I was thinking that, when after the Boogaloo, when people start forming their own nation states again, it might be a good idea for some of those constitutions to include clauses that encourage regular people to, you have to form as many independent militias as possible and paramilitary organizations, because that's pretty much the only way ultimately that you could prevent the government from doing stuff like this. You make them too afraid to engage in murderous behavior through the threat of violence. This might not be entirely related, but I was also thinking that there's this pattern that repeats itself in Western history, and sometimes this pattern repeats itself like every generation, and sometimes it lasts for hundreds of years before it starts repeating. But what happens is you have a government and a group of elite, and their power slowly grows. They slowly take power away from the regular people and become more monolithic. And then eventually the people become so oppressed that they decide to rise up against the government and against the ruling elite. And usually what happens is some disgruntled member of the elite will rise up to lead the people in a revolt against the government and the rest of the elite, and they physically remove the current system and then install a new set of elite and a new government, and then the cycle starts over again. And generally speaking, the more they manage to spread the power, the longer the cycle lasts before it has to repeat itself. And at the moment, we're living in a very long, toward the end of a very long spin of the wheel, so to speak. But relatively soon, the cycle's probably going to start over again. And one of the things to think about that I would encourage people to think about is, well, how do we ensure that the next cycle might be even longer than the one that we're currently coming out of? And the one thought I had was trying to enshrine in the new societies that form gun ownership, and also like completely doing away with classical liberalism a return to, I don't know, Christian democracy or Christian nationalism. No, sorry, I shouldn't have said Christian democracy. I meant to say Christian nationalism. And one thing I thought of was you could make it a requirement that everyone who could possibly consider themselves to be an authority would have to form their own paramilitary organization, and that they would get, like, I don't know, tax incentives to do that and stuff like that. Every school, every company, anyone who owned indentured servants would be required to form his own paramilitary organization and have shooting competitions and stuff like that multiple times a year. And yeah, if you were able to enshrine that into a society, that would probably, I think, go a long way to ensuring that the cycle of peace lasted. The cycle of peace and prosperity probably lasted a very long time. It would ultimately fall, of course, because, you know, that's just what always happens. But it would probably be very beneficial, I think. Oh, I hope that made sense. The final thing here, I was going to find a picture of St. Louis to put on the screen here, but I don't have one, so I'm just going to put my branding up and start reading from a book on the life of St. Louis by Jacques Le Goff. And this might be kind of unusual for sort of a news podcast, obviously, because this is history, not news. But if the podcast of the Lotus Eaters can do this sort of thing or have segments like this, then I suppose I can too. Yeah, I think St. Louis is someone who I think a lot of people should look to for guidance, I think, in this period. One of his most famous quotes, or the quotations that is associated with him, is something like, "Debate is the province of clergy and learned." I don't know. He said clergy and kings. I think the regular man, when he's faced with evil, should just run evil through with his sword. And I thought, well, yes, that is probably a better way of approaching things than the modern classical liberal approach, which is, yes, we can approach truth, we can get to the truth through discussion and debate and that sort of thing. And it's like, well, yeah, if you're arguing about, like, you know, whether you should tax 2% or 3% of your income on in order to build a new road, then sure. But that doesn't work at all if you're dealing with a segment of the population who are dedicated to turning the world over to the rule of Satan and murdering the entire human race. That doesn't work. You don't. Regular people should not engage in debates with Satan's minions. That's ridiculous. They should be tarred and feathered and driven from the town. And So anyway, I'm going to start reading from this book. It was let's see, when was this published? It was originally written in French, of course, since St. Louis was French. And so Jacques Le Goff was born in 1924. So this edition of the book does not indicate that he's dead. So I don't know. Maybe he's still alive. No, he can't be. He'd be 100 years old. Okay, maybe he is alive, but this edition of the book doesn't say anything about that. Book was published in doesn't say. It says it was translated in 1996, but doesn't say the original publication date. That's a bit annoying. But I'm going to presume that maybe it was written in the 1960s or so, but I'm not sure. All right, so part 1, chapter 1, From Birth to Marriage, 1214 to 1234. So this is during the medieval period. Like his destiny, the birth of one of the most famous kings of France is shrouded in uncertainties. Louis, the second known son of Louis, Louis, the second known son of Louis, the elder son and heir of the King of France, Philip Augustus II, and of Louis's wife, Blanche of Castile, was born on April 25th, most probably in the year 2014 at Poissy, about 30 kilometers from Paris. His father had received this fiefdom from his grandfather in 1209, the year he was knighted at the relatively late age of 22. With the death of his father in 1226, the child became King Louis IX. He would die in 1270, so that's about 50 years or so. From the date of his canonization in 1297, he would be known as Saint Louis, the only canonized king of France. As a king, Saint Louis often liked to refer to himself as Louis de Poissy, not only because it was a common habit of great persons of the time to affix the name of the place they were born to their first name, but especially because, as a good Christian, Saint Louis dated his true birth to the day of his baptism at Poissy. The birth of Saint Louis by itself therefore expresses certain fundamental certain fundamental characteristics of the structures in which the history of the French monarchy evolved at the beginning of the 13th century. The first of these structures is the importance of biological chance in determining the fate of families, and more particularly that of the royal family. The fertility of couples, the number and gender of children in a dynasty in which, without proclaiming it as a law, tradition pushes daughters and their sons away from succession to the throne, and the mortality of infants and young children were all decisive factors in the transmission of royal power. In this society, there was no civil state to record the memory of premature deaths. Though still rare, the first parish records appeared only in the 14th century. As Philip Arié has shown so well, it was a society in which the child did not represent any special value that inspired interest, even if his parents cherished him. The number and identity of children of the royal family who passed away early in life remains unknown to us. As it often happened in this time of high infant mortality that did not spare even powerful families, Louis and Blanche, St. Louis's parents, must have had 2 or 3 children who died at a tender age. We do not know their names, number, sex, and dates of birth and death. At the time of their marriage in 1200, Louis was 13 and Blanche was 12. What? Wow, that's young. Philip, their first known son, the one who would have inherited the throne, was born in 1209 and died at the age of 9 in 1218. St. Louis only became the eldest surviving son and therefore successor to the crown at 4 years of age. The death of eldest sons was not rare for the Capetians. Henry I, the only king from 1031 to 1060, had an older brother, Huge, I think it's pronounced Huge, who died before their father, Robert the Pious. Louis VII, the only king from 1137 to 1180, wow, that guy lived a long time, had an older brother, Philip, who died before his father, Louis VI. St. Louis himself was succeeded by his second-born son, Philip III, who became heir to the throne in 1260 after the death of his older brother Louis, dead at the age of 16. An heir at 4, in St. Louis's case, the death of his older brother must not have left any deep psychological marks. As a child, he probably had only the faintest memory of the brief time during which he was not destined to be king. Nonetheless, these premature deaths of the elder sons of the royal family obscure the list of kings' names for posterity, since, as Andrew Lewis has shown, royal dynasties, and especially the Capetian dynasty, did not choose the given names of kings by chance. The basic choices were provided by the names of the Robertan Capetians, Robert and Hugh, or Huge, and after that, Eudes, is that a French name? Eudes and Henri. Then, probably due to the influence of Anne of Kiev, the Russian wife of Henry I, Henri I, we begin to see the Greek name Philippe. Later, when the taboos placed on the names of the great Carolingians disappeared with the recognition of the Carolingian ancestry of the Capetians, the name Louis, a form of Clovis, Louis is a form of Clovis? It must be a Latin name, I guess. Louis, Clui. Oh, I see. Clovis would be pronounced Clois in Latin, I think. Clois, Clois, Louis, Clois. Yes. Let me start again. The name Louis, a form of Clois, which also tied the Capetians to the Merovingians, appeared with Louis VI, who was born in 1081. Finally, we also get the name Charles, with Pierre Charlot, the bastard son of Philip Augustus. Among the brothers of St. Louis, a Jean and an Alphonse were added to the list, introduced by the Queen Mother Blanche of the royal family of Castile. In the Capetian family, at the end of the 12th century, there was a pronounced tendency to give the eldest son the name of his grandfather and the name of the father to the second son. Thus, St. Louis's older brother had been given the name of his grandfather, Philippe Augustus, while Louis received the name of his father, the future Louis VIII. We can only read the code for naming the kings of France by keeping track of the eventful deaths of the oldest sons. St. Louis was born into a dynasty whose emblems, in this case that of royal names, were in the process of being defined. Otherwise, aside from certain expectations, people were not interested in children's exact and complete dates of birth, even in the case of children of the royal family. For instance, we know that St. Louis's grandfather, Philip Augustus, was born on the night of August 21st and 22nd in 1165 because his long-anticipated birth appeared to be a miracle and had been recorded by the chroniclers as an event. Before him, his father, Louis XVI, had only girls from his 3 successive marriages, and at 45 years of age was considered an old man, at 45, who had been unable to procreate, even though his third wife was very young. On the other hand, contemporaries saw nothing memorable in the birth of the future Louis VIII, nor in the births of his 2 sons, the firstborn Philip, dead at 9, and the secondborn St. Louis. Therefore, we do not know St. Louis's birth date with any certainty. As credible sources tell us that he died in 1270 at the age of 56, or in his 56th year, we must hesitate between 1214 and 1215. Some have also thought it was in 1213 or 1216, although this is not very likely. Like most historians today, I think the correct date is 1214. The reader will immediately make the connection with the date of the great victory of his grandfather, Philip Augustus, at Beauvais on July 27th of the same year. On July 27th of the same year. St. Louis was probably born 3 months before this important event, one of the major dates in the historical memory of the French. Although the victory at Beauvais was widely celebrated, no historian of the time, not even any popular historian, ever made this connection. What people consider memorable has changed in nature between the 13th century and the end of the 20th century. Most of St. Louis's earliest biographers did, however, note the day of his birth on April 25th. This was, first of all, because Christianity considered the day of one's birth essential due to the idea that the festival or the patron of the day seemed to foretell the destiny of the newborn, or at least to assure him of a privileged protector before God. This attitude existed outside of any horoscope of birth or nativity, a type of text that only began to appear in the 14th century. St. Louis's biographers explained the meaning of this birth on April 25th, St. Mark's Day. Let me read that again. St. Louis's biographers explained the meaning of this birth on April 25th, St. Mark's Day. Joinville, St. Louis's close companion, provides one of the best explanations of his day of birth. Quotation, "So, as I have heard it told, he was born after Easter on the day of St. Mark the Evangelist. On this day, people carry the cross in processions in many places, and in France they are called black crosses. So, this was like a prophecy of the great multitude of people who died on these two crusades, the one in Egypt and the other when he died in Carthage, for there was much great mourning over these in this world, and many great joys that arise from them in heaven, for those who died as true crusaders on these two great pilgrimages." I didn't quite follow that, but I'm going to continue. That's the end of the quotation. Starting with his birth, thanks to this text that is not an isolated source, we have not only been informed about a processional practice concerning the dead, which came from a pagan, folkloric, barely Christianized tradition, but also came face to face with an image of St. Louis that may seem strange to us. Medieval tradition has not transmitted it to our current field of historical memory. Here we get a glimpse of St. Louis not only as a denizen of heaven, but a St. Louis who, in his closeness to death, appeared as a king of the dead and of death, as a funerary king. I did not follow that at all. So he was born on St. Mark's Day, and there was a parade where people were carrying black crosses traditionally, and this was later considered to be somehow prophetic about the life of St. Louis, I guess. The child heir. In 1218, at the age of 4, St. Louis became the probable heir to the throne after his father Louis, if God gives them life. The death of his older brother Philip failed to capture the interest of the chroniclers, no doubt because he was very young. He was only 9 years old and seemed somewhat far from being king, with his grandfather Philip Augustus still on the throne. In 1131, almost a century later, another Philip had died at the age of 15. He was the older brother of Louis VI, a king crowned as coadjutor, with his father. This Philip had been buried in the necropolis of the kings of Saint-Denis, whereas St. Louis's older brother was buried only in Notre Dame de Paris, where his father Louis VIII and his mother Blanche of Castile erected a chapel for him in 1225. When the young Louis became primogenitus, the official term for the firstborn, the heir to the throne, this was not noted as a memorable event. No specific information prior to 1226 about this event has reached us. His parents, and especially his mother, paid special attention to his education, as befitting a future king, not only because it was thought that a sovereign should be morally and religiously formed for royal duties, prepared to protect the church and to follow its advice, but also because the maxim put forth by the Bishop of Chartres, the Englishman John of Salisbury, in his book Polycraticus, that an illiterate king is only a crowned ass, was inspiring Christian courts and dynasties more and more, inviting them to give future kings a solid Latin education based on the classical liberal arts. We can guess that, like the young aristocrats of his time, the child had more contact with his mother than with his father, who probably took over when he began his military training. As he liked to recall as an adult, the child also grew up in contact with his aging grandfather, the great Philip Augustus, who, after his brilliant victory at Bouvines in July 1214, left his son, Louis's father, the responsibility of making war, which he did with limited success. He typically had less success in England, for example, but had greater success in Languedoc, Languedoc. 50 years old in 1215, the king would prefer from this point on to rest on the laurels of the victorious ruler. The new conqueror of Normandy, the victor of Bouvines, became Philip the Conqueror. Several experienced and faithful advisers wisely and firmly governed the kingdom of this sovereign, who brought his people the most beautiful gift a king can give, peace. At their head, Friar Guérin, the Hospitaller monk who became Bishop of Saint-Ly, was almost a vice-king, but with no personal ambitions, and because he was a cleric with no dynastic progeny. Philip Augustus must have loved the presence of his grandson, who would eventually become the first king of France to have known his grandfather. This could only reinforce the dynasty, especially since his grandfather had such a strong personality. Dynastic power surrounded the child Louis. His father was rarely seen, but bore the nickname the Lion. His two parents had a strong presence in the child's life. The grandfather had been strong and still remained powerful, while his mother would appear as a strong woman of Scripture. There were no models of weakness around the child. On July 14th, 1223, Philip Augustus died of malaria, at the age of 57. His death introduced two innovations into the history of the Capetian kings. The first of these concerned funerals, which took on an exceptionally sumptuous nature. For the first time in France, Philip Augustus was buried following the royal custom, or more regio, inspired by Byzantine ceremony, and even more by the funerals of the English Plantagenet kings. The body was exposed with the royal insignia, the regalia. The king was dressed in the royal vestments, a tunic, and a dalmatic covered in a sheet of gold. What is a dalmatic? He held the crown and scepter. Buried in Saint-Denis, carried there by a cortege of barons and bishops, his face was left uncovered the day after his death. The king's body was both collective as an effect of the insignia, and individual due to the appearance of his face, and he was thus solemnly interred. The child, who could neither follow the cortege nor attend the funeral, must have heard about the ceremony. He learned that a king of France was not buried in just any place or in just any way. The king was established as a king, more than ever in death. If we believe the accounts of several chroniclers, the second innovation was that some people at the royal court and in the Church of France thought of having Philip Augustus recognized as a saint. It seemed that the only prior case of this involved the Benedictine monk Helgaud, and I have to brush up on my French pronunciation, Helgaud of Fleury-sur-Loire, who had tried to make the son of Hugh Capet into a saint nearly 2 centuries earlier. He had not succeeded. The sycophants of Philip Augustus came no closer. However, they claimed that certain miracles had been performed by the king, and that because his birth had been miraculous, he was also Philip Dieudonné, his death was accompanied by signs that mark the death of saints. A comet announced it, and an Italian knight had a vision of it and was healed so that he could bear news of it to a cardinal and the Pope, who, having verified the report, declared it in the middle of a session of the Papal Council. Nonetheless, in 1223, rumors of miracles, comets, and visions were no longer enough to confer sainthood. The proclamation of sainthood could only result from a canonizing proceeding carried out by the court in Rome. How could the Pope have recognized the sainthood of a king that his predecessor had excommunicated for a conjugal life deemed scandalous in Rome? Whether the child had heard of the aborted attempt to canonize his grandfather or not, and if this were the case, whether he thought about it consciously or unconsciously, in any case he would have succeeded where Philip Augustus had failed. People were able to make a different case in his favor on two different points. He did not accomplish miracles during his life, but after his death, in conformity with Pope Innocent III's decision at the beginning of the 13th century to officially recognize only posthumous miracles as true miracles. Innocent III implemented this decision in order to thwart miracle workers and to keep Christians from following the false prophets and sorcerers who invented imaginary miracles. Good idea. St. Louis would also be proclaimed a saint for his virtues and his Christian lifestyle, particularly in married life. The content of sainthood changed in the course of the 13th century. People had tried to make Philip Augustus a saint on the basis of an older model of sainthood. St. Louis would become a modern saint with everything traditional that this included as well. In any case, St. Louis enjoyed telling stories about his grandfather. If he happened to lose his temper with a servant, he remembered that Philip Augustus would do the same, and that it was only justice being served. Guillaume de Saint-Patou tells of one evening at bedtime when St. Louis wanted to see the sore on his wounded leg. An old servant who held a candle above the king's leg in order to cast light on it let a drop of burning wax fall on it. The saint who was sitting on the bed, because of the pain he felt, stretched out on the bed and said, "Ah, Jean!" And the servant Jean answered, "Ha! I hurt you." And the saintly king responded, "Jean, my ancestor threw you out of the house for less than that." Jean had in fact told the saint king and others that King Philip once kicked him out of the manor because he had put logs on the fire that crackled as they burned. Man. I wish I can relate to that. Sometimes the alpha goes a little crazy. According to his entourage and his hagiographer, St. Louis did not punish Jean and kept him in his service, thereby proving his goodness and his superiority over his grandfather. Joinville reports a similar episode, although St. Louis does not appear superior to his grandfather in it. While the king was in Hyères upon returning from his first crusade in 1254, he was out walking, but the path became so narrow that he wanted to mount his palfrey. When no one brought it to him, he had to mount Joinville's. When Ponce, his squire, finally arrived with his palfrey, the king bore down on him with anger and reprimanded him severely. Joinville then said, "Sire, you should go easy on Ponce, the squire, because he has served your grandfather and your father and you." Refusing to disarm, the king replied to Joinville, "Seneschal, he has not served us. It is we who have served him when we put up with having him around us with the bad qualities that he has." For King Philip, my grandfather, told me that we must reward these people, some more, some less, according to how they serve. And he used to say that no one can be a good ruler on this earth if he does not also know how to boldly and harshly refuse what he can give. Let me read that again. King Philip, my grandfather, told me that we must reward these people, some more or some less, according to how they serve. And he used to say, that no one should be a good ruler, that no one can be a good ruler on this earth if he does not also know how to boldly and harshly refuse what he can give. I guess so. Thus the child began to learn the skills of kingship around his grandfather, who was the one that he wanted his readers to think of in his Enseignements à son fils, this mirror for princes, a moral testament that he composed only a short time before his death for the future Philip III. All right, so St. Louis wrote a book called The Mirror for Princes, or Enseignement à son fils. I don't think that's a direct translation, but something to my son. Reflections for my son or something. I want you to remember, this is a quotation from The Mirror for Princes, I want you to remember the words of King Philip, my grandfather, that a member of his council who heard them reported to me. One day the king was with his private council, and the members of his council told him that the clerics were doing him great wrong, and that people were astonished by the way he was putting up with it. And he responded, I know perfectly well what they are doing, that they are doing me wrong, but when I think of the honors that our Lord has done me, I prefer to tolerate the harm rather than cause a scandal between myself and the Holy Church. It's very magnanimous. Philip Augustus was laid to rest next to his forefathers in the royal necropolis of Saint-Denis. Louis was heir to the throne of France from that point on. 3 years later, in 1226, his own father, Louis VIII, joined his grandfather in the cemetery of kings. The child, Louis, became King of France at the age of 12. The world around the king. Now we must situate the young king in the world around him. We must even situate him in relation to places he would never go, and among his great and among his great contemporaries, the ones he knew and the ones he would never know, in addition to his interlocutors, his antagonists, and his enemies. In order to understand St. Louis's place in the history of his time, we must situate him on the broadest horizons. If we circumscribed this history within the narrow space of its hero's life, even within the Kingdom of France, it would not be fully understood because it would lack the necessary references and the appropriate scale. This is particularly important as Louis acted outside the borders of the Kingdom of France, within the larger space of Christendom, even if he did not physically appear everywhere within it. He would also leave France to visit the hostile world of Islam in person, venturing forth to North Africa and the Middle East, and even through the intermediary of his plans, his dreams, and his envoys, into the very heart of the Orient, that endless source of marvels and nightmares. The Oriental Horizon, Byzantium, Islam, and the Mongol Empire. 3 great entities comprised the essential expanse of the world in which St. Louis had just become King of France. In appearance, these 3 entities outshone the small plot of Latin Christendom that included the Kingdom of France. But one of them, Byzantium, had begun its slow decline. The other, Islam, had entered a period of stagnation and fragmentation. The third, that of the Mongol conquest, seemed both vague and splendid in its unifying and devastating power. The closest force was the Byzantine world. It seemed close in geographical space as well as by its religion and recent military and political history. The Byzantine Empire was like a shrinking skin eaten away in Asia Minor by the Seljuk Turks, while the Serbs and the Bulgars broke away from it in the Balkans. The Bulgars founded a second empire with the Assanid dynasty, which reached its apogee under the kings Kalojan, 1196 to 1207, and John III Asen, 1218 to 1241. Their religion, Greek Christianity, which was considered the only Christian orthodoxy since the schism between Greeks and Latins in 1054, was more of a cause of conflict than a tie between 2 Christendoms. Of course, the Turkish threat made the reunion of the two churches a priority. This objective gave rise to long negotiations between the papacy and the Byzantines throughout the time of St. Louis, leading to an official reconciliation at the Second Council of Lyon, 1274, 4 years after King Louis's death. However, the agreement was more political than religious, and being superficial, did not last. One fantasy obsessed Latin Christendom in the first half of the 13th century, the fantasy of retaking Constantinople from the Byzantine Greeks and founding a Latin Christian empire there. Oh, I've never heard of that. The dream seemed to come true around the time of St. Louis's birth. In 1204, pushed by the Byzantine in 1204, pushed by the Byzantine emperor's Venetian creditors, the Crusaders of the Fourth Crusade captured Constantinople and founded a Latin empire there the following year. The first emperor, Baudouin I, Baudouin, I don't know what language this is. I'm going to presume it's French. Baudouin I, the Count of Flanders, was taken prisoner by the Bulgars at Adrianopolis in 1205 and died in captivity. The Latin Empire held up in Byzantium. Beginning in 1228, the emperor was Baudouin II of Courtenay. Deep in debt, he sold the relics of the Passion to St. Louis in 1239. In 1261, Michael VIII Paleologus chased him from Constantinople. Obsessed by the crusade to the Holy Land, St. Louis was in no hurry to help Baudouin II retake Constantinople. The dream of a Latin empire on the shores of the Bosphorus was dead. The hope for Latin Christian domination over the Greek Orthodox subjects of the formerly Byzantine Empire, and for the reunification of an emperor of the Germanic Holy Roman Empire in the West with a Latin emperor in Constantinople, for the old emperor under obedience to Rome and the spiritual guidance of the Pope faded. That is a convoluted sentence. The Peloponnesian remained in the hands of the Latin princes of Morea, while the Venetians and Genoese snatched up the commerce in the remaining parts of the Byzantine Empire. Ultimately, Byzantium would play only a very marginal role in the thoughts and politics of St. Louis. At the same time, the Muslim world was undergoing conflicting movements, spurts of power, at a slow process of decline, even though this decline was not marked as Western historiography makes it out to be. In the West, there was the collapse of the great Western Muslim Empire that was founded in the 12th century by the Berber Almohads of Morocco, who had extended their dominion over the entire Maghreb and the southern half of Spain. After the key victory of the League of Kings at Las Navas de Tolosa in 1212, the Christian reconquest brought the fall of Beja to Portugal, 1235, of the Baleares. Man, I don't know how to pronounce these words. Of the Baleares and Valencia to Aragon, and of Cordoba, Murcia, Cartagena, Seville, and Cadiz to Castilla. Only the Muslim enclaves of Granada and Malaga remained. The Maghreb split into three domains: that of the Hafsids in Tunis, the Zionids in the Central Atlas. I don't know what any of these places are, and the Marinids in the south of Morocco. There would be no Spanish horizon for St. Louis's crusade, since the Spanish took charge of it themselves, while the King of France could cling to the illusion that the Sultan of Tunis would be easily converted or just as easily conquered. Let's see, how much more of this is there? I think I'll take a break there. I don't know how great this is reading from a history book in a podcast. I find it interesting, and you can only hope that if someone else, if you find it interesting, there's probably other people out there who would find it interesting. It would take me many hours to read through this all on as a book on tape. I think maybe I will, from now on, I will constrain myself to only reading out portions of it that maybe I highlight as I read through it myself. That might be a better idea than just reading out the whole thing, particularly when there's a lot of words which I have difficulty pronouncing. I have I have some basic knowledge of how to pronounce French, but obviously not that great. Okay, let me double check here. Did I cover everything I was intending to cover today? Looks like it. Just let me double check here. Yeah, I think that's it. One of the thoughts I have about this podcast, about ArtGainz Live, is, there's some YouTubers I listen to who, I put them on and I don't really listen to what they're saying. It's just so that I can have some human sounds in the background while I'm doing something else. While I'm, or in the background while I'm going to bed or something like that. And I think, well, there are some people who, even if all they were doing was reading the phone book, their voice is pleasant enough to listen to, and perhaps my voice is that kind of voice. Puts people at ease. I've had people say things to that effect to me, that my voice has that kind of effect. I'm not sure whether to be flattered or not when people tell me that they find my voice very gentle. I don't know. That's and I'm paraphrasing. That's not quite the way they stated it, but yeah. So anyway, so this is ArtGainz Live number 4. Your ultimate resource for Christian nationalist infotainment and commentary. Please check out my novel, The Screaming Void, which you can find in the description. There's also a short story called The Lure, which you can also find in the description. It's got some, I think it has some sound effects and music in it. Right, what I should really do is upload the last few chapters of The Screaming Void to Archive, and I'll see if I can get around to doing that sometime. And yeah, so if you like this content, please like, subscribe, and share with your friends, I guess. I'm not sure how much of a audience I have. What's the word? How big of an audience I would have for content like this. I was thinking I might try to imitate what John Delarose does, is where he has podcasts sort of like this. They're probably somewhat higher quality than what I do, but he intersperses that with regular short videos, which are more designed to attract new viewers and that sort of thing. So I think maybe I will try my hand at some of that. And if these what I would also like to do is I'd like to have other guests come on this podcast. See if I can get RP Grizzly on, or other friends from Social Galactic or other places. If I can figure out how to get that to work, that would be great. Then it wouldn't be just me trying to talk until I have something to say. Not sure who it was who said that. There was some famous reporter, maybe it was Walter Cronkite, who said that the news is the business where you talk until you have something to say. Well, I have difficulty coming up with things to say when I run out of thoughts. Either my thoughts are running too fast for me to slow them down and communicate them in a logical manner, or they grind to a halt and I lose my train of thought. So it would be helpful to have co-hosts who have a similar interests and could provide their own unique commentary, which I'm sure would be very interesting for anyone listening. All right, so once again, this is ArtGainz. This is ArtGainz Live number 4. Remember to like and subscribe and check back later. Thanks again.